We have been debating about what is Indian political theory since the last 3 months, I guess. And I wanted to avoid chairing this session. Wanted Professor Arvind Sharma, who is a known philosopher, to chair this, just to, in a way, mediate between two differing opinions in our group. So, Professor Savita Singh and Professor Anuradha Veeravalli, very interestingly, has presented in last 3 months a kind of creative tension in our group about what is political theory. So you may find it very interesting, and I'm sure we believe in dialectical evolution of ideas, so collectively probably we will do that. I just want to recap yesterday's discussion a little bit, and it was so fascinating, and I think there was a Purv Paksh and Uttar Paksh in the previous discussion. Obviously, as Professor Yogendra Yadav said while leaving, that we must have longer discussion with Professor Mahajan, who he treated as his Purv Paksh. And he thought his idea was Uttar Paksh. So the Purv Paksh of political theory probably has deep connection with the Western model of political theory, and they have been trying to discover if there could be similar political theory in India, or at best we can appropriate certain ideas from Indian tradition and create a new dimensions. So that is one thing, and other is no, let's have our own reality and theorize that. I remember long back we had Creative Theory Colloquium on what is creative theory. Something very interesting emerged in that. So we thought there are 3 kinds of theories. One is theory to theory movement, and Gopal Guru called it Hawa Hawai, that you move from one theory to other theory, so you reconstruct a new theory out of many theories available. The second one is, we thought, was theory in search of reality. That you have a theory and now you want to explain your reality with the help of that theory. And Gopal Guru thought that probably you need to adjust the reality in order to fit into the theory. That was the second kind of theorization. And third one is theory, practice and theory. Of course, we have a whole lot of theories created by human beings in different parts of the world. And then we are encountering new kind of reality. We engage with that, try to explain that. And then we go back to reconstructing a new theory, not out of nothing, but out of something which is available. So I think the debate that took place yesterday probably need to now move to the second phase. It's no more issue that whether we should engage with the West or not. I mean, it goes without saying that the entire world, humanity, wherever they are, since human beings are theory-building beings, they must have built their theory with the capacity of reflexivity they have. And now we are in India facing new challenges, new models. So do we need to have the framework from the West and then see what we can take from India to rebuild that? Or do we need to have a framework from India and then take things from other places to rebuild our own theory? That, I think, is the question that we have been struggling with. I call it bunana and binana. So बुनावट किसकी है? यदि बुनावट वेस्ट की है, हम उसमें कुछ टाके लगा रहे हैं भारत से लेके, या बुनावट हमारी है, हम बाहर से लेके उसमें कुछ टाके लगा रहे हैं. This is हम बुन रहे हैं या बिन रहे हैं? That, I think, is the real challenge that we have. Can we build a theory and shift the paradigm completely? That is the question. Why this question has become important today, not because of identity assertion of Indian people. I think this is one approach to Indian tradition, that we have to assert our identity. I think that's the worst kind of engagement with knowledge. So we are also not interested in indigeneity. What if you have got some indigenous concepts and categories? How it is important? We are interested in what I call democratic dialogue. democratic negotiation between traditions for the purpose of liberation, for the purpose of liberative exercises. So probably there's a global theoretical crisis, and a lot of people globally are saying that it's end of time and new theories have to emerge. In that emergence of new theory, in creation of new universal, an emergentist universal, what kind of contribution we can make from India? That is the point I think we have been debating. So I'm sure that the session is going to be very exciting, and since we don't have the crowd like yesterday, so it will be much more intense probably. So let me invite Professor Anuradha Veeravalli to begin with.
I might overshoot, but I'll behave myself as much as possible.
So after, if you can remind after 15 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's always an honor and privilege. It's been an honor and privilege to be associated with the Creative Theory Colloquium. And today I think I will take this up. This is a topic close to my heart. So I'm, I think, doubly honored that I have this opportunity to speak. So I'll start without much ado, because I'm short of time, so I will.
20 minutes, not short.
Yeah. I would have liked the speakers from yesterday to have been here today. It's otherwise like a sort of pravachan, and they don't wait to hear their response.
You are recorded, they will watch it. Don't worry.
That's not the same as being in the Menon. Anyway, but that's how things are. Now, taking my cue from A.K. Ramanujan's 1989 essay, "Is there an Indian way of thinking?" with progressive emphasis to the question. So it was, is there an Indian way of thinking? I start with the question, is there an Indian political theory? When I first joined Delhi University, I heard of this essay from by A.K. Ramanujan. It had really raised my hackles because I felt, how arrogant is this about several thousand-year-old intellectual tradition that you even ask whether there is an Indian way of thinking. But I find that so many years later, we are still struggling with the same questions. So I have decided to adopt this thing now. Is there, the first emphasis, questions the existence, presence, and recognizability of Indian political theory. So it might be around us, but we don't have the capacity to recognize it. And therefore then we follow on backwards to question its presence and its very existence. To that, very briefly, I want to say that for minds that want to remain colonized, one can offer no solace. So if you want to keep your eyes closed and don't see what is around you and available, then one cannot really help. And the next, is there an, raises the question whether there is one identifiable monolithic Indian political tradition, given the plurality of schools of thought, traditions, vernacular and classical, lived experience, and so on. So Indian asks whether yet there is something beyond this plurality, there is something that unites them, these traditions, other than their geographical origin, data and experience. So is calling something Indian political theory, actually just locating the theory in India rather than in its point of view, in its language rather than its message. So, is there something which distinguishes this point of view from the dominant modern Western traditions of left and liberal leaning that have today become a part of the Indian experience? So can we claim that left, right, center, all of them are now Indian because we add our experience to these points of view? Or is there a distinct Indian point of view which is in some ways culturally embedded and yet is something which is growing, perhaps in the underbelly of Indian culture, not dominant, but still there? Political theory asks whether we have or can have a political theory at all. This question belongs to the Western anthropological tradition that has traditionally liked to classify other civilizations as savage, lower down in the ladder of evolution, qualifying as objects of study, not subjects, which are characterized in another avatar as relics of the past, that they have no relevance today. We had perhaps a rich past, but they have no relevance today, with no currency whatsoever except as objects of pride-fulfilling right-wing agendas. Only recently have we learned that Indians too could be argumentative. Note Meerananda's recent lament in this context that the left or a few left-leaning intellectuals have fallen prey to this project unwittingly or wittingly. Now I am going to work my way backwards from Gandhi because I feel to delineating what I think are the salient features that distinguish the Indian point of view, whose genealogy, I must reiterate, is not confined to the Indian tradition, history, or experience alone, but transcends it. This becomes clear in Gandhi as he marks a historical milestone, a frontier whose experiments with truth can neither be classified as tradition nor modernity, Western nor Eastern, and neither theory nor practice. And that is the point of the term experiment, that experiment brings together theory and practice in a particular relationship. The practice is something which tests theory and validates it. So I think it's very important to notice that he calls his life's work as being experiments with truth. Now, with truth also has, it's not, it's a truth that is already there and which is with a capital T, which is in a sense absolute and not available to Aam Janta, but it needs to be tested by each person for himself, with his conscience and with his problems at hand in the field. And that is where experiments with truth, bringing theory and practice together, establish the particular truth of theory in or of that particular instance in time and space or context, celebrating the universal in the particular, which is again a very Indian understanding of the thing, that it expects the universal to emerge from the particular, as it were, as part of this experiment, rather than imposing the universal on the particular. So when the West sends its norms to us and we impose it through our laws and our constitution, it is an imposition. It is something that runs external to this. But when we have experiments with truth, it is from the particular that universal, the unity with the universal arises. So there might be completely different experiments, but and completely different cultural contexts, but there is a unifying understanding of what the human condition is all about. Now, in transcending borders,
Just hold on. You can take the chairs away and sit somewhere, and that's a better idea. Huh? Here are the chairs. Yeah, please come. Sorry.
no.
The chair had died.
Now, personally, I feel that these questions of decolonization, after we have had the Gandhian experiments with truth, for whatever they are worth, in different, right from the political struggle to the establishment of the constructive program and experiments in different things, I feel the question of colonialism and post-colonialism are or should be redundant. At least we should take Gandhi's experiments seriously. That's my personal opinion. I will not argue for it today, but that's where I'm coming from. In Transcending Borders, Gandhi counters the hegemonic universalism presupposed by modern Western political theory and by classical Indian orthodox traditions. So it's countering both modern Western political theory and traditional Indian orthodox positions. So questions of authenticity are out of reach for Gandhi. That question is just not relevant. The experiment with truth is. So he forges an Indian point of view, establishing a vernacular or people's modernity, which he found resonances of in the other Europe. So Gandhi himself in his experiment. So all these questions that were asked yesterday, in some senses, the answers were found by Gandhi and practiced by him. So if we have not taken Gandhi seriously, we really have no right to be asking these questions that we were, as though Gandhi didn't exist at all. So which he found resonances of in the other Europe, Ruskin, Thoreau, Tolstoy, to just name a few. I will leave the rest to people. They know this. Ashish Nandi, and in a more substantial way, J.P.S. Oberoi has worked on this other Europe, on how the structures and modes of classification in knowledge differ fundamentally from that emerging from the European Enlightenment, notably on the difference between Goethe and Newton's theory of light, one experiment or one example out of the three that Professor Oberoi had worked on throughout his life. This is not a simple matter of organizing them within an evolutionary scale of one being ahead or more rational than the other. Far be it from feeding into right-wing agendas. Epistemological frames are at stake that will lay the metaphysical and civilizational grounds for peace, or alternatively for war. So this, what is at stake is whether we accept presuppositions of peace or presuppositions of war. Not that if we accept presuppositions of peace, it will just be, Milky Way of peace. It won't be that. But at least the grounds for the argument for peace will be stronger, and the methods that will be used will be something with that in sight. How it's different in the modern Western tradition, I think I will become clear as I go ahead. What is undeniably central? So now to the main topic of trying to look at whether the Indian tradition has something different to offer. What is undeniably central to India's political roots is the question at the heart of the Mahabharata: why must one go to war at all? Is kingdom, a bit of land or territory, and power worth all the bloodshed and violence? The answer is no simple call to renunciation. It is not, अरे भाई सब छोड़ के दुनिया को छोड़ के, संसार को छोड़ के और कहीं हिमालय निकल जाओ, ऐसा नहीं है. The answer is no simple call to renunciation, but a comprehensive and intensive discussion of statecraft and its role in establishing dharma. So the goal is to establish dharma, not to win or lose the war, but to establish dharma. That which will support body politic, and cosmos, or the universe. Not merely power and wealth of the ruler or the state. The thesis is not that one must not go to war, not renunciation, but that one must reflect hard on the conditions that must necessitate war, what can be avoided and what augments war, to consider its limits. Underlying this question is the belief or presupposition that war is not an original condition of human nature. So here comes the political theory. What is the ground for this? What is our theory of human nature? That war is not an original condition of human nature or even of nature itself. And this runs counter to the Darwinian thesis on which dominant Western political theory is based. Gandhi's insistence on nonviolence as a law of human existence, not just non-violence. So he's not just being ethical and a good Samaritan, but he's talking as a scientist, maybe a political scientist, that of the law of human existence being non-violence. This belongs in this tradition. But as we all know, it goes far beyond in his experiments with non-violent struggle. Gandhi's ideal state, Ram Rajya, stands for his theory that the true test of the strength of the king and the support he gets from civil society to his office lies in his willing acceptance of exile from the seat of power. So the first test of a good king is whether he can have power over his people in exile. Okay? That is what Rama is asked to do just before he takes over as king. This was the underlying principle, perhaps, in his advice that Congress should disband itself post-independence. Yudhishthira's urge to take Vanaprastha after the war against the Kauravas, after the war has been won, and reluctance to take charge of the kingdom is met with criticism by one and all. Oh my God. It is his duty as king to resume office and establish the welfare of his people. The principle of rule and self-governance of a human being and civil society, and therefore of the state, is neither covetousness nor power, nor is it a renunciation of wealth and power. It is sacrifice. And I quote, when Yudhishthira puts his proposal that he wants to renounce the kingdom, Devasthana, his guru or great sage, says, the supreme ordainer created wealth for sacrifice, and he created man also for taking care of that wealth and for performing sacrifice. For this reason, the whole of one's wealth should be applied to sacrifice. Pleasure should follow from it as a natural consequence. Now I will go to what I think is the basis of Gandhi, the Mahabharata and so on and so forth. In the Arthashastra, there is invocation of the notion of the cultivation of the senses. And this cultivation of the senses has surprisingly a resonance in Marx and of course in Gandhi, who brings forward the 5 vows of non-violence, truth, asteya, aparigraha, and so on and so forth. And I feel that this cultivation of senses is what distinguishes the Indian tradition and its genealogy from, whether it's Western or Indian, from the modern Western regime of political theory, which is dominant in our political life and university. So to quote from Marx, by the way, the Arthashastra has the 2 initial chapters on the cultivation of the senses as training for the king. And without that training, it would be impossible for him to remain as king without following this thing. Now, look at Marx in the 1844 manuscripts. The forming of the senses is a labor of the entire history of the world down to the present. And further, he goes on to say, and he is quite clear, that the senses of the social man differ from those of the non-social man. So the senses of man's true nature and of alienated man are fundamentally different, and we must recognize that. Of course, the thesis is that modern Western political theory serves alienated man, and I would agree with Marx, and perhaps Gandhi would say that differently, but he is also saying the same thing. Now, to go to the Western tradition, can I have 5 minutes more? Then, yeah, because it's impossible to say what I have to say. So I use Kant to explain what are the foundations of modern Western political theory. Kant's essay on perpetual peace, written in 1796, considered a classic in peace and reconciliation studies, sets the record straight in this matter. That is, following Hobbes's theory of human nature in the supplement to the main body of his text, which is essentially a policy document otherwise, he cannot resist revealing the epistemological plot underlying the modern nation state and its aspirations for peace. Peace, he argues, is not a consequence of any moral condition of man. It is an end, an idea prompted or prescribed to us by reason. So the autonomy of reason is being established, quite contrary to the self-seeking natural propensities of man. So the natural propensities of man are self-seeking and therefore directed towards war and violence. He argues further that reason must use the natural propensities of man towards war to work in its favor. So reason should use this to impress upon man that it is his duty to follow peace. So reason has to be imposed on the natural propensities of man. Thus, the appeal for peace is and can be advocated in practice only as a matter of expedience. Now, just as I felt that the cultivation of the senses is the foundation of Indian political thought, here in Kant you find that
Just sum it up.
It's
I'll come back to the debate point.
Yeah.
Take 15 minutes for that.
okay. So, how are these natural propensities of war embedded in the constitution? Because Kant's thing is that reason has to be used, or these natural propensities have to be brought under reason to be made use of to establish peace. My thesis is that these natural propensities for war come to be enshrined as the fundamental, inalienable natural rights of self-preservation, property, and freedom, on which modern political theory and institutions of the modern nation state come into force to establish peace in society. Hobbes himself says that what goes in exchange for these natural rights being established by the state, by the Leviathan, is the capacity for self-governance. So people give up their capacity for self-governance to the Leviathan in exchange for the establishment of these rights. Self-governance, if you realize, means Swaraj. The translation is Swaraj. So this is the foundation that establishes the modern nation state. Now, Marx and Gandhi say that this is actually the establishment of these three rights. If you notice that the right to self-preservation is the right to possess your body and to own it. The right to property is to possess land, nature, and to own it. The right to freedom is actually the right to possess reason and enterprise, and to own it. And to own it, as Marx points out, is to commodify it, to be able to buy and sell this for a price. And it is a perversion of the human senses. So this is what establishes, as opposed to the cultivation of senses, establishes the foundations of the modern nation state, as opposed to the dualism of reason and propensities for war within human beings as the natural condition of human nature. I stop here. And
thank you, Anuradha. I'm so sorry. May go to Professor Singh.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So, this paper is on interpretive language of Indian political theory. All right. So, before I will also read some portions of what I have written. It's a longer thing, but because we don't have much time, I'm just going to certain things I'm going to make it clear so that you presuppose when I'm making other arguments. Okay. For example, doing political theory in India is an act of realizing our potentials as an intellectual tradition in modern times. So inevitably, when we are doing political theory, we have a temporal understanding of what it means. Yesterday, somebody said that Bhikkhu Parekh is not being discussed and those kinds of things. Briefly, I would like to make, because the paper he wrote, which shook everybody in a way, Poverty of Indian Political Theory, there are some misconceptions there also, but there is a provocation which is genuine, and we have accepted that provocation. So you can even see that our attempt to discuss what is Indian political theory is also that. It's a kind of a response to something that he wrote. First of all, Indian political theory faces no condition of famine or impoverishment. It has been delightfully plural. It has been delightfully discursive. And to do political theory today is to have an immense responsibility of looking at our plural traditions and plural texts. What the provocation does is to ask us to look more intently and critically within ourselves. The second thing that I want to say, which I want you all to presuppose, is that political theory cannot be replicated if we are calling it Indian political theory. It's a kind of another misconception, because I have written texts in which I have found that I am ontologically in a plural situation. And this plurality is not only mine, it is something that I call the hermeneutical situation in which we are always placed when we are thinking, when we are addressing, the Yogendra was asking, we have to ask the right question. Whenever we are asking questions related to philosophy, literature, all that, we always have possibilities of many, many ways of understanding. Western modernity challenges us in a way that it has posed one singular universal framework, and that too also was disrupted within West itself. So I take that moment of disruption within the Western history of most Western modernity as very significant for our practice of political theory. Third thing, I want to make it very clear to you all that there's not one way to understand anything truthfully. If truth is our pursuit, then there cannot be just one way of understanding it. And Western political theory, Charles Taylor calls it malaise of modernity, has been dogged by this malaise from the very beginning, because the philosophy and method that they developed to understand their own new society was based on two presuppositions or two findings. One, what he calls, and I also agree, is the moment of disengaged rationality, which produced a notion of self that was rational precisely because it was it had dissociated itself from any order of thing. The emergence of Western self is by disrupting or by challenging the order of which it was a part. But that disengaged, rational, modern individual also took two turns, right? And the second one that I think that any relevant discussion of political theory in India can be approached, which I have approached. One is that since you have separated yourself from the outer world, the order of things which were meaningful, you have to find again a way of understanding yourself. And that moment is a kind of a lonely moment, quite alone. That allowed individual to accept its fate as atomistic. And the atomistic understanding of Western modern self has given rise to a number of important things that they have done, particularly science, natural science. The division between natural and social science is a product of that kind of lonely business of understanding the world in which we were placed. The second one, to which I have my allegiance, is that you are not really lonely, you are not really atomistic, you are always in a situation of interpreting your condition. And so the second definition of modern individual is that invariably we have descriptions of ourselves as individuals. We have self-understandings of ourselves, which Heidegger and Gadamer, the hermeneutical thinkers, call pretext. That is to say, you may have disrupted the order of things, but you have actually not disrupted language, history, memory, complicated creative things that you have done as human beings. So as individuals, we have the option of interpreting our situation. And this is also a modern act because it gives rise to freedom of a very different kind. So knowing and understanding are two kinds of activities. You'll find its expression in German philosophy as Naturwissenschaften and Geistwissenschaften. Geistwissenschaften has a tradition, modern tradition of interpretation, starting from Boltzmann to Dilthey to Schleiermacher to Heidegger to Gadamer, this whole tradition, Charles Taylor. And this tradition continuously argues that there are two realms. One is of understanding the objectivity of the world given outside, and the other one is to understand our society made of individuals who are self-interpreting, who realize their freedom not in terms of accumulation of facts, but in terms of understanding the meaning of being. So the important moment that arrives there is that being is prior to knowing. And the whole debate broke out called overcoming epistemology. So please do not take West as the ultimate other. That other is highly interesting, highly creative and critical. So when we come to our own tradition, we find that we have been through and through interpretive. And that is why I say that most of the discourses that we carried out in the first half of mid-19th century onwards basically has been Mimamsic. Mimamsa is a tradition of interpretation within our tradition. And it is such a wonderful way of being in the world that today in the hermeneutical tradition of the West, what we are calling interpretation, like hermeneutics, we already have it, and in a much more richer manner. So Vedas, for example, Vedas are considered as texts which are not to be touched because they are eternal. There are principles that are not written. It's not interfered by human frailty. It's like almost God's voice or something like that. Even today, the neo-conservative elements in our political theory, they think that Vedas had that kind of status. But Vedas always needed interpretation to be understood. And the Purva Mimamsa is basically interpreting the rituals correctly for people to seek salvation or to do things rightly, in a right manner. All right? But after Shankara comes, when he disrupts the Purva Mimamsa period by saying that rituals and customs and all those things have got nothing to do with the ultimate truth. Brahman is beyond all of this. So, sirf ek hi Brahma hai, dujo nasti. There is no second. And if there is anything second, say for example this world, it is pure illusion, it's Maya. Right. And so the problem arose of how to take it intellectually, how to accept it. Manindra keeps asking, so how to accept someone's experience of something sacred? I've told him, interpretation is the only way out. Nobody can teach you what that person experienced. That you have to do it yourself. There's a whole chapter of what experience means within the Indian tradition of literature. So in the Uttar Mimamsa, which I consider that part as highly, highly interesting, where I have lodged my own discourse of modernity. So given the complex situation of West and our reality, at least 3 languages are required to understand any piece of reality that we confront. One I call, which comes a little bit from the Purva Mimamsa period, I call the neo-conservative language, a modern terminology basically. And then replicative understanding, because a lot of people think that we are only replicating West. I can say that Partha Chatterjee puts Nehru in this language of replication. I simply challenge that. I mean, sort of responding to Western modernity in terms of having a vision of a modern India does not mean you are replicating. It only means that you are trying to find another language, another way of coping with this new reality. And the third language I called hermeneutical language, interpretive language. And today, it is this language within which how to do Indian political theory and how we have done. There is no way of saying how to do. There is only how we have done. What we, as a piece of epistemological exercise that we make, is basically always situated, located in our ontology. Right? So the hermeneutical it requires so much more work on ourselves, on our text, on our situation. It requires so much analysis, so much reading, so many times we have to cross boundaries, that it is not easy to do Indian political theory. It is simply recognizing that we are in the midst of great complexities. That is why this is just a method of, a sort of demonstrating this complexity, that I said that, any reality must have at least 3 languages. These 3 languages, and because the reality has all these aspects. Okay, so the problem, the people who have thought hermeneutically in a kind of an obvious manner are different from the people who have thought that they are replicating. Even the replicators are basically interpreting. That's my claim. So Nehru was pointed out as someone who was replicating. You read Nehru, you'll find that Nehru is. Why did he have to write History of India? Why did he write Discovery of India? What all he has written in that? Have a look. Who are the positivists? Who are the people who said that only empirical method is important for social theory in India? I can't name even one. So this kind of it's a dream. It's a kind of a false dream that a lot of people think that we can have an autonomous Indian way of thinking, of doing, of wearing clothes, of eating food. No, that's a disaster. From the beginning, because it has no way out. I just want to read something from J.L. Mehta, whom I have considered very important in terms of interpretation of modern political theory. He says that there is one situation where there is this one unilinear way of doing dharma shastras and so on and so forth. But quickly after that he says, but we live in a world where number of other creatures live, number of other philosophies are developed. West in a predominant manner, in a modern times, its self has been defined by the Western philosophy and Western theory. We continuously live in 2 worlds, and we have to make sense of these 2 worlds. There is no way you can deny that. And there is no way you can demonize it, because what modern West has done in the name of modernity is a very important moment in human history. All right? We may not have Hobbes in India, we may not have Locke here, but we've had Raja Ram Mohan Roy, we have Aurobindo, we have Vivekanand, we have interpretations and interpretations and interpretation. I just want to, because I have very little time, I want to tell you what all happened. 3 arguments I'll just quickly give. One is that all these Uttar Mimansik thinkers were basically trying to interpret Vedanta. After Shankara, they all were sort of so jittery. They say, no, this world can't be just an illusion. It is not such a blighted place. It's a very interesting world, because in which we do things as we consider human, right? Even illusions are quite human, basically, even if it is to be said that way. And Maya, and for my feminist writing also, I've questioned this. It's a very patriarchal way of saying that Maya divides the world between Brahman and illusion. Maya is nothing of that kind of a thing. Maya herself is power of Brahman, according to Aurobindo, according to Vivekananda. And he says that Brahman unconceals itself through Maya. There is otherwise no way for us to know who the Brahman is and how this concept has arisen and why it excites Indian mind so much. This is one argument. Second is that if Maya is a part of Brahmanic project, I think of Heidegger most of the time, that the world is a project of big being. That is what it is. If it is so, then this world needs to be validated. That's where our epistemology comes. this world needs to be not rejected as devoid of any meaning. It is highly meaningful. So Ram Mohan Roy, why do you think he even thought about sati system as demonic, even though it was shastric? Why do you think that he thought that India should have modern education system? Because it was based on this understanding that this world needs to be improved. Human beings need to get out of darkness of various kinds of ritualistic practices which are not allowing them to realize their own humanity. Right? The second thing that is done is, and in particular Aurobindo in his integral yoga, he's saying this world and that world, they are integral, they are integrated, and we've learned to think how this world and the other world is to be understood. So he says, what is Brahman, what is transcendent, what is universal, is immanentalist view he brings out in the concrete, in this Maya. So there is never a bereftness, there is never a separation between human beings and his or her transcendent reality. So if you read Roy Bhaskar, you'll realize, and we all value Roy Bhaskar a lot, it's quite complicated, variegated structure of reality, in which if you want to take it, we can say that the world, the Maya constituted by Maya, is the surface, and the Brahman is its depth. That's where hermeneutics comes. Every time what reality has been given to you, you have to find its meaning, which can be supported by epistemologically and ontologically by the depth. And there is no end to how many meanings can we derive about our humanity from this structure. That is why the pluralism of various kinds is very important for any discourse on Indian political theory. And as a consequence, just a minute, just one argument, tell me. As a consequence, you'll find all four Purusharthas are also reinterpreted in Indian political theory. All right, because the Brahman becomes immanent, it is present only by absence. This is Roy Bhaskar. The Purusharthas with which we live in this world, the most important one according to worldly illusory reality is that a householder is as important as a sannyasi. A nishkan karma is far better than renouncing the world. The artha and kama are not to be dichotomized from moksha. So the hyper-good, the whole notion of hyper-good has been reinterpreted, and that produced our modernity. And this, I say, you'll find in Gandhi, in Radha Krishna, you name anybody whom you can study to create the basis of Indian political theory. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have two very interesting papers, and you can feel the creative tension in the paper. And now I request Professor Krishna Menon. So, 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Menon, for inviting me to join you this morning. I had the pleasure of discussing two very interesting presentations. Savita Singh, whose main argument is that India responded not by mere opposition or imitation, but through an interpretative engagement guided by the Mimamsa traditions. And she argues that political theory in India is best understood not as a replication of Western political or natural science, but as an interpretative project. True, Mimamsa is a great valuable resource that we have. It is an interpretative resource, and it is well known for its ability and tradition of interpreting Vedas, especially the ritualistic aspects of it. But the thought that crosses my mind is that while that might be the case, we need to place that epistemological tradition of Vedas in a certain context. That knowledge context cannot be erased while we draw from that knowledge context. What was the context of the Vedic epistemology? What was the context of Vedic traditions? I think we need to bear that in mind while wanting to claim it for ourselves in our attempts to understand Indian society. I'm sure everyone here understands what I'm trying to get at. There's no need for me to actually elaborate upon that. I'm glad that Savita's presentation was a robust defense of the pluriverse of political theory in the West, because there is often a tendency to pit them as binary opposites, and thank you for doing that. Anuradha, Veeravalli, thank you for your presentation. And you drew the most interesting argument I found in her presentation was about Gandhi's experiments within quote as an epistemic cornerstone. However, in a gathering such as this, I'm sure I don't have to highlight the critical questions that one could have asked of Gandhi, like Periyar asked, like Ambedkar and others have asked, of Gandhi's commitment to the principle of non-violence and Ram Rajya in the context of a society that is characterized by social hierarchies such as caste. So to whom did it apply? How did it apply? These are some of the questions. I'm also, Anuradha, unable to be persuaded that peace and not war is the presupposition of political theory in India. War is not always, in my understanding, between nation states. It could be within the nation state. There are many communities and groups of people living in India under war-like situations, Kashmir, Manipur, Muslim minorities in many parts of India. So I need to read you more and speak with you more and understand this better. Both these presentations, of course, are framed within the larger questions being asked in this colloquium, the title of which immediately reminded me of none other than the god of decoloniality, in a manner of speaking, Gugi Wangthyok. And some of the questions he asked in a very important conference back in the 1970s, I found it very useful to ask similar questions to this colloquium. What is political theory of India? Is it solely about the Indian experience? Is it theorizing done by Indians? What if a non-Indian theorizes about India? What if an Indian political theorist theorizes American politics? Or is it only political theory in Indian languages, etc., etc., etc.? So there are many what ifs that we could actually think about. I noted carefully the purpose of this colloquium. It is intended to decolonize political theory, an enterprise that in today's context has to be undertaken with great caution, dodging ammunition of many kinds actually. The attempts to decolonize broadly come from, on the one hand, those who sought to recast political theory in India. And they tried to do this by adopting a feminist, Dalit, post-colonial, and so on frameworks. Another group is trying to do the same thing by going back in time to a certain imagined cutoff to resurrect Indian political theory, Sai Deepak and others. And on the other hand, there are those who suggest that attempts to decolonize political theory, amongst other intellectual domains in India, have resulted in what Meerananda calls the Weimar moment, preparing the ground for a Nazi, or in India's case, a Hindu supremacist takeover. I'm glad to note that the concept note is treading cautiously and not suggesting that there could be one homogeneous Indian alternative, while also not diminishing the need to find our voices to articulate and systematize our political knowledge emerging from our political struggles and experiences. In this context, both the presentations today have made a sincere attempt to be creative. The concept note states that the attempt here is to establish that theorizing is not a Western activity alone, and Savita has tried to establish that very ably. However, the more specific form of political theory as it emerged in the West is in question here, and the colloquium proposes rightly that it is India's political life that has been the font of theorization in India, and that's reassuring. Much of the theory in society like ours has often been inextricably linked with activism and social movement, and not always something that emerged out of university departments and research organizations. As a teacher of gender studies, I can immediately think of creative leaps in theorization within feminist theory in India that have been the result of new ways of thinking, which in turn are based on new ways of doing. The women's movement, the struggles of queer and disabled people, environmental movements, these are all illustrations of creative leaps in political theory in India. The colloquium mentions some significant concepts: Swaraj, Seva, Swadharma, Vikar, Samajik Nyay, Atmabodh. These are very path-breaking, significant concepts. But equally path-breaking have been the concepts I would like to propose: Brahminical patriarchy, Dalit feminist standpoint, queeristan, Ardhanarishwara, Dalit queerness, Muslim gay masculinity, so on and so forth. Some of the most riveting theoretical debates within contemporary feminist writing in India, for instance, have emerged from theoretical and conceptual differences. I draw your attention to the very interesting debate between our friend Nivedita Menon and Professor Mary John around the concept of intersectionality. I'm not going to talk about it, but I'm sure you're all aware of it. Yogendra Yadav, in his well-known two-part Indian Express article published in August 2024, cites Professor Shuchi Kapila's observation that we need to look at unlikely places to discern the efflorescence of political theory. I find this a very interesting suggestion and would like to share some unlikely places from where new and exciting Indian political theory is emerging. I would like to share two such examples. Professor Vajpayee is here, and she would, I'm sure, agree with me when I say that doing, thinking, singing, and theorizing of the singer-writer T.M. Krishna is a very important contribution, in my opinion, to political theory in India. His intense interrogation of caste and gendered foundations of classical music and dance in southern India, specifically, has resulted in a new way of thinking about caste and gender power and Indian society. And I think this is a place where we as political theorists should be looking at for new ways of doing creative political theory. But towards the end, what is it that we can do? What is it that I can do as a teacher? Interestingly, much of the impetus within the universities in India for the project of decolonization has come from the National Education Policy 2020, which recommends the incorporation of a beast called the Indian knowledge system. Yeah, the heritage of, so and I quote the document, the heritage of ancient and eternal IKS, which is Indian knowledge system, and thought has been a guiding light for this policy. And it says the Indian education system produced great scholars such as Charaka, Sushruta, Aryabhata, Varahamira, Bhaskaracharya, Brahmagupta, Chanakya, Chakrapani, Madhava, Panini, Patanjali, Nagarjuna, Gautama, Pingala, Shankaradeva, Maitrey, Gargi, and Tiruvalluvar. I read out all the names only to draw your attention to the fact that almost everybody is a man in this list. Almost everybody wrote in Sanskrit. Women, people from the northeast, and people who do not write in Sanskrit, did not write in Sanskrit, are mostly left out. So there is Tiruvalluvar as an afterthought, and there is Maitrey and Gargi. I think decolonial approaches to political theory needs to critically reflect with this concept note on Indian knowledge systems. Here is an opportunity for us as teachers and curriculum makers and research supervisors to intervene. The colloquium's concept note, I was very happy, it says that this is a collective effort, this attempt to decolonize political theory. It is in this vein that my colleague and I tried framing a course which had the blessings of one of our dear friends sitting here, Professor Madhulika Banerjee. The course was titled, or is titled, Being in the World, Knowing the World, Bhakti as Jnana, 6th to 12th century. A course that tries to look at ways other than enlightenment-based rationality of engaging with the world. That's the concept of bhakti, which is based on emotions, immersions, and experience. All good old feminist ideas. So what we devised in the course, I believe, is a course that shows 4 poets, all women, Avvaiyar, Andal, Kalammiyar, and Akka Mahadevi, as having lived a life and then theorized about that life, about family, marriage, mobility, sexuality, and many other staple feminist concepts through elegant poetry. Savita, I'm sure you'll enjoy this course. I'll end by saying that we need to remember, in all this excitement, we do need to remember Meera Nanda's words of caution, where she says in her book Field Guide to Post-Truth India, that there is an attempt to legitimize a certain kind of knowledge and tradition steeped in caste and gender hierarchies by placing them on a continuum with epistemologies born out of critical scrutiny and a liberatory agenda. I heard Maninder talk about this earlier this morning. It would be a travesty of learning and theorizing if we are not cautious and alert. Hence, this enterprise of strengthening and creating Indian political theory, as the concept note suggests, has to necessarily be a collective one, open to critical scrutiny and drawn closely from the struggles and movements for democratic change and transformation.
Thank you. Thank you. Chetna.
Thank you, FCSR, for giving me this opportunity. I'll just say a few words about Savita ma'am and Anuradha ma'am's presentation. So Savita ma'am talked about how the Western political theory is in some ways a product of radical rationality and radical individualism, whereas Indian political theory has the potential to be based upon a certain kind of interpretive engagements. It's not a straightaway replication, it cannot be, because if we draw some traditions from the Mimamsic understanding or from Mimamsa tradition, we will understand that Indian political theory is constantly evolving with certain kind of meanings and subjectivity. So that's what she calls a hermeneutic circle, that an understanding of being is very important, an understanding of your situation is very important, and therefore Indian political theory needs to be constantly evolving. She also talks about the fact that Indian political theory is not impoverished, there's no poverty of it. Indian political theory takes into account the kind of pluralism that is there in Indian intellectual tradition and society in general. Professor Anuradha talked about situating Indian political theory through the lens of Gandhi's experiment, and argues that Gandhi, while writing his experiments, tried debunking the Western political theory and also the assumption of classical orthodox political theory, and argued for the idea that there is no absolute truth, there are only experiments, and through the practice of those experiments we can probably reach to an understanding of theory as well as an understanding of practice, both. I also like the point where she says that the Indian political theory may be based upon a cultivation of senses and not on certain kinds of absolute reason and truth. However, I have certain questions which are not questions, there are certain complications that I deal with whenever I try to think about Indian political theory. So the concept note is of course very well written, and it says that we are just trying to understand whether we can have whether we can ask certain universal questions from the Indian location, from the Indian context, certain universal questions that are emerging from the Indian context. So that's what we are trying to find out. We are not absolutely trying to find out a pure definition of what Indian political theory is. So when I'm thinking of this question, I am confused in the sense that how do we engage with universal questions from Indian locations? If we do it, is there a possibility that we might become too much locus-centric? And if we become locus-centric, if we become too much embedded in the location, which we also have to if we are trying to find answers to some local problems and local issues which are contextual to India, we have to do that. But while we are doing that, is there a chance that the political theory might become too provincial in nature? And if it becomes provincial in nature, are we not contesting the very nature of theory itself? Because an important characteristic of the theory is that there has to be a certain kind of potential in the theory to be generalized, abstract, and be universal. So if we are asking question from a local context, then is there a chance that it might become provincial, and then we are challenging one of the important characteristics of the theory itself? The second question that I have in my mind, a confusion that I have in my mind, is that in the contemporary social science, the idea of theory building comes from natural laws. And again, when we focus much on location, then ideas get socially contextualized. And when ideas get socially contextualized, we have another problem. The fundamental problem is, let's say we are talking about an Indian political theory. Do we have a consensus on the idea of Indianness so far? I mean, we might have, but I'm just thinking that how do we build a consensus? Because the Indianness is extremely plural in nature. So what is Indian? If we are predominantly talking about Indianness in the sense of post-independent India, then there's another complexity. And that is the linguistic complexity, because then India is essentially a union of states. So then the question of language comes in. Why am I saying that the question of language is important to theory? Because theory has a semantic connotation, and language is a vector of theory in a certain sense. So language becomes then important. Now then the question of linguistic complexity is something we will have to deal with. The question is then how to address the question of metaphor, analogy, classification, and categorization. Because all of this is the process of theory building, that you'll have observation, metaphor, analogy, classification, and categorization, and then you build a theory. Now these metaphors, analogies, and classification, in a Indian context, all of these will be culturally embedded in meanings. So how many meanings can we have? Is it possible to derive a certain kind of universality from such plural meaning? I would like that if we can do it, but I'm just asking how much potential do we have? So, and these metaphors, analogies, and these classification and categories important because when we talk about theory, according to Thomas Kuhn, there are two things. There's a context of discovery and there's a context of justification. In the context of discovery, metaphors, analogy, classification are very important. And if these things are too much culturally embedded in the location, they might not have the potential of becoming universal. They may have, but I'm just trying to understand. I don't know if I'm trying to put forth my comments very clearly, but I'm just saying that the context of discovery of a theory is important, and if in the context of discovery there are metaphors and classification and analogy which are too much locally contextualized, how do we derive a universal meaning from them? So in India we mostly talk about the second thing that Thomas Kuhn talked about, that the context of judgment, context of justification. So context of justification is something that's much talked about, but the context of discovery is something which is not much talked about while doing Indian political theory. So this is something that I'm constantly struggling with, that how to not make Indian political theory provincial, how to understand a certain kind of universalism when the meanings and metaphors are too much contextually located and culturally embedded. Thank you.
Thank you, Chetna. Sorry for that. We really were running out of time. We thought that if we keep two papers, probably it will be 10, 12 minutes. So may I take some questions, very sharp questions?
Yeah, sir.
And Vivek, you want to say something? Yeah, please. Yes.
Thank you for the wonderful presentations. My name is Vivek. I have essentially two sets of questions. The first is from Professor Veeravalli. You said that I think I find your thesis quite Gandhian in the sense that you're saying, if I understand you correctly, that the principle of sort of Indian civilization, Indian way of thinking is the idea of the cultivation of the senses. And I am intrigued by the term cultivation. You do not use restraint because those two are, and I think especially in the context of Gandhi, one might say, and it's the criticism that people like Tagore had of Gandhi, that he misunderstood the idea of restraint, and that you can't really extinguish passions, but you can cultivate them in some sense. But I want to push back a little bit on this idea that the propensity to go to war is something which is like a deep presupposition of Western political thought. It's true, you find this idea in Thucydides, you also find this idea in Hobbes. But for Hobbes, there's also Rousseau. There's also an Aristotle who would object to that idea and say that, well, that's not human nature. That human nature is essentially perfected when you live in the polis, and so on and so forth. I also had a more sort of general question for all the panelists, which is that, I wonder how we are using the term theory. Is all reflection on politics political theory? Or is political theory the name of a particular kind of reflection? And if so, what does that reflection? What is that reflection? I guess I had something to say about provincialization, but I'll hold my comments because we are short of time.
Thank you. Mallikarjun.
Hi, I'm Mallikarjun. My questions are connecting to yesterday's presentations. Yesterday it was said that we need a knowledge of Indian languages which seem to be necessary. So if the panelists could speak on that. The second is, Savita ma'am, you spoke about hermeneutics and how Mimamsa is already sort of a school of hermeneutics that we have. But I believe the question is like that people say that we also have logic, we also have reason. The question seems to be what is structurally different or similar in that hermeneutic activity. The third was on, you brought up custom. So if the panelists could speak on the role of custom, because it is very important category epistemologically in modern Western philosophy, and how custom speaks to, like for example, we had debates on temple entry and so on and so forth. And last, there seems to be an anxiety about the question of identity. Modern political landscape seems to be so charged with the question of identity, assertion of identity, but at the same time, when it comes to Indian political theory or any provincializing, the anxiety is that we don't have any identity. So here, Professor Ramu Gandhi once said about what it means to be Hindu. So he says that just like all rivers long to meet the ocean, perhaps anyone who has that longing seems. So is there a way to interpret it?
Thank you. Thank you. Dhananjay, then Rakesh. I will come back to you.
Just one line. Am I audible? Is integral also radical? The context of Mimamsic tradition or new Vedantic or new Vedantas? Because this is what I wanted to say. Because integral tradition comes from various traditions till Dindayal and many others have also formulated Chitta as an important source of defining Purusartha and integrations. And this is also available in Aurobindo and many others. And there was another worldview that this integral word may not require, but radical word is another possibility. So this could be.
Okay, Rakesh. Sure.
Yes, sir. So thank you for the insightful presentations. I've got two questions, one from Anuradha ma'am and one from Savita ma'am. Ma'am, when you are to Anuradha ma'am, the way you are conceptualizing the very conceptual vocabulary of war, I want to ask you, because war is, as you said, that it is not the original condition of human nature, and you are quoting Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita in that sense in the way. If we see from the very onset of Gita in the very first verse, then there it is seen that it is not. It is seen in context of historical combat, where it is say that Dharm Kshetre, Kuru Kshetre, Samveta Yusava, Manka Pandava, Chaitin Guru Sanjay. But when we go to the 13th chapter of Gita and so sort of, but I will have to think. So the only thing that I want to ask, in the 13th chapter, they talk about Kshetra and Kshetra. So not being the original condition of human nature, but war is seen as an ontological condition of embodied being, right? And then in the chapter 18, we see in the 66th verse, where the witness consciousness has been introduced by Krishna in terms of Sarvadharman Pratija, Mamikam Sarnam Braja, Amsa Amsara Papavesa. So how do you see war in this context?
Alright, that's it.
So one question to Savita.
One line.
Okay, one line. Yeah? So ma'am, Savita, when you are talking about customs and rituals and Sankaracharya basically refuting, I think that we should read Sankaracharya, what do you think, in terms of the entire cosmology of Prasthantrayani, and not only in one terms of that, because he talks about Adhyas and Chidabhyas, and liberation not being an ontological event, but liberation as an epistemic correction. So rituals and customs are seen as epistemic instruments of purification for getting the Chetna.
Thank you. I don't think we have time for more questions, and we can only request our speakers to answer in very short
I'll just
time.
I'll give up, because we don't have time. I'm so glad to hear all these questions, because they themselves can serve as answers to a lot of people. All right. So this was the presentation that I made today. The interpretive language of Indian political theory was only. I could only get time to barely sort of say as to what it means. Right. I have not been able to go analytically within it. And the questions that you people are asking require a lot of time. I can only say one thing, that Indian political theory is something challenging, it is doable, it is a meaningful activity, and we have done it not so badly. All right? People have come to political theory to understand their self also. They don't have to go to Vedas and Vedanta only to understand their self. Indian political theory itself has reflected on our modern condition as being secular, as aspiring for freedom, as valuing equality. All these things have emerged out of this notion of what it means to be an interpretive self, what it means to have self-description, and how it should not be, somebody asked identity thing, how it should not be violated while you are doing political theory, while you are constructing an epistemology which has an ontology. That is to say, you cannot disregard yourself or cannot disregard the subject self-description while you are doing political theory. That is a very important framework within which we can also discuss modern importance of freedom, of equality, of identity, of autonomy. There is one person I did not mention because there was not much time, Humboldt. He's been a very important figure in our political theory. That is to say, there is a notion of authenticity which is related to language, culture, it's linguistic. To follow your own self-description, to follow your own ideal as you conceptualize, is a way to be a subject. Someone who have a space to explore the meaning of his or her being within a political or social setup is important for political theory in India.
Thank you. Anuradha. I know it's very difficult to
Thank you for this question on cultivation. I think it's very important because the Indian tradition has been known predominantly in terms of a tradition of renunciation. And so this was a discovery for me also, that the cultivation of the senses was. And then I found that Marx in the 1844 manuscripts also was. Of course, this I proceed to discuss in my paper, which I could not present, in terms of the sense of having, which he says is a perversion. Marx says that it's a perversion of human nature. And what I tried to argue is that this sense of having and possession is something which is embedded in the three fundamental rights of self-preservation, possession of the body, of property, possession of land and labor, and of freedom, possession of reason and enterprise. So the foundations of modern Western theory, and this is what I mean by theory, to go to your next question, that these are so fundamental to argue that in opposition to this, the sense of having, to argue for the sense of the cultivation of senses and of sacrifice as being fundamental to human nature and society. This is the order of theorizing that, and I'm saying that this is predominantly Indian, and you can find threads of it from Gandhi backwards, and perhaps elsewhere also in the vernacular traditions. And even Rousseau, when it comes to insofar as it's grounded in property, self-preservation, and this thing, he is someone who cannot really avoid these questions. The foundation is such. It is said that the presuppositions are. I will take a minute, because no, I think these are important.
I'm sure we'll have more time to discuss this. I have a back chair. I've taken 10 minutes more, I guess.